Hi, this is Ren.
This is Casey.
And this is All Walks of Film, a live stream edition. Today we are going to be talking about V for Vendetta.
To remember the 5th of November by.
Yes. While we are recording this on November the 4th, I expect most of the people listening to this are going to be listening to it on the 5th of November and the days after.
It's probably the 5th of November somewhere in the world.
Japan?
I think, yeah. So it counts.
So my original experience with V for Vendetta, of course, was the film. I watched the film. I was a fan of Alan Moore's work, but I watched the film before I saw them. Before I read the book, and I was a huge fan of the film. Also, this was back before the Wachowskis really started to suck. So
Shit.
It was still, yeah, I know, but
you're not wrong. It's just shady.
Yeah, but it was a really good experience. I really liked the politics of the movie, but like when I really delved into the graphic novel, I realized that the movie sugarcoated a lot of the darker undertones. And when I heard that they are making a live action TV show based on this property, readapting it.
And in Britain this time.
Yeah, it's going to be produced by Channel 4, who also did Black Mirror and Humans. So that seems pretty interesting. I think that a much longer drawn out adaptation might work for it. Now, I don't know if it would be a mini series or an actual full blown out show. But either way, I think another dab at this material might be interesting. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Did you want to start out with the graphic novel, or did you want to start out with the movie?
Well, I started with, of course, the graphic novel. You know, the original. You said, of course, like you should watch the movie first. I mean, come on. I'm just messing with you. I read the graphic novel first, and it was the original, you know, little bound compilation of all the issues put together. And I'm a huge fanatic of the comic. I have two favorite English-speaking comics. Once you throw manga in there, it becomes a whole other ballpark. But it's Bone and V for Vendetta, and that's like it for me. And so I read the original normal compilation of it, and then I found like the Ultimate Edition and realized all the stuff that was left out. And you can argue like, oh, well, they're just, you know, the covers and some one-page panels. It slows down the story. They cut some integral stuff, in my opinion. But like Gordon's death is reduced to 2 panels instead of multiple pages of time to let it sink in. You know, it's a really huge dramatic moment, and it's just like cut. So, and now I own, you know, the normal bound copy, and then I actually have all the trades. So I have the entire thing in its originality, you know, its original format. So I really liked V for Vendetta, and I watched the movie. And the movie is nothing at all like the comic. Like, they have so little in common, but it's not out of disrespect for the comic, which is what I think is really intriguing about it. It's just an entirely different take on it. And you can either like it or dislike it, but I don't think it comes down to, oh, they didn't know the source material, they don't care about producing the source material. To a certain point, I think it's about disagreeing with the perspective of the original. And you could say, you know, oh, then don't adapt it, do something different. But honestly, I think that the adaptation for what it is stands on its own and has a lot of interesting points to it.
Yeah, the graphic novel is really an indictment of anarchistic ideologies, and the movie seems to exclaim it as where we should go.
No,
to a
it
certain extent.
romanticizes it. Let's not even pussyfoot around on that one. It romanticizes it. Like,
so much so that you could argue that the movie inspired an entire movement. Of course, that movement is Anonymous, who you see them on the internet. Many of them wear the
Guy Fawkes mask. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, from the actual film.
Right.
You know, usually you don't see any other renditions, though sometimes that appears. But I wrote a whole paper on actually looking at Guy Fawkes separate from V for Vendetta, and some of the revelations that I made were really fascinating. Unfortunately, I was not able to pull that paper for this, but I could probably plug it in later once I find it. But I did come to some interesting revelations, mainly the whole idea behind Guy Fawkes is really more myth than fact.
Which is why in the book he's more of an illusion as opposed an alliteration. Is it an illusion? It's an illusion. Yeah. Illusion with an A. Right?
Yes, okay. I believe so.
It's more of an illusion as opposed to the movie where it's like, let's open up on this historical scene of this thing happening and bring Guy Fawkes as a historical figure into play without really addressing anything of the period, which honestly I think is probably one of the worst parts of the movie. It's literally just that opening with Guy Fawkes. I really despise him for that reason.
Well, yeah. Also, his execution was a lot more brutal than that, and I get that you don't want to like show that in a PG-13 movie,
then
but
don't show it.
Yeah. But that being said, I think the graphic novel is a really fascinating piece. Pretty much everything that Alan Moore has written, he's not an artist himself, but you know, in his own right, not a visual artist. That's what I meant. It's a very fine piece of work. Now, I would definitely put this as my second favorite graphic novel that Alan Moore wrote. I'm still partial to Watchmen. I know that does serve as a bit of contention between the two of us of which great piece of work is greater.
It's about taste, I think. They're both incredible. It's just which do you personally prefer?
Now, if we're talking about which is a better film adaptation, there's no contest. V for Vendetta is a better film than Watchmen.
Which is funny because Watchmen is a lot more slavish and yet misses the point entirely.
Well, whereas this is about because it's just cliff noting everything. You know, everything feels rushed in the movie. Like none of the scenes carry their weight because the movie's like, come on, come on, come on.
Well, there's also a fundamental misunderstanding of all the characters, which also is true in the V for Vendetta movie. That's the biggest indictment against it as an adaptation, is its misunderstanding of the characters. But at least like the V for Vendetta movie has its own vision and its own perspective. And really where it gets weaker is when it has to keep some of the plot points from the original book that don't fit because you changed all the characters and you changed your point.
Yeah.
Do you want to get into it a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Get into the meat of it? Okay. So let's start off with V, who in the movie is a nerd. He's like this adorable nerd who, you know, he keeps books kind of like action figures. He's fencing with a, you know, a suit of armor that he keeps. He watches movies and romanticizes them and like has little quippy conversations about it. And he makes eggs in the, you know, egg in the basket with like a frilly apron on. Like he's just cute.
Yeah.
Like you just kind of want to pinch his cheeks and hug him. He's just adorable. And his whole political viewpoint is about, you know, populism, which we're seeing a huge uprising of in America right now, thank God. But it's all about the populist ideas. It's about the many versus the few.
Which
sort of, but not really. I mean, in the movie it is. In the movie, that's all it is. You know, there's this sort of sad, oh, well, I was an experiment and I'm hideous and disfigured, but let's not talk about that because I'm cute and it looks really awesome when I take down these government figures, and, you know, we're going to skip over all the torture stuff, like the really bad torture stuff. And it's just going to be like sad when I die because I was just this big political activist symbol. Whereas in the book, you can understand V and you can definitely sympathize with him for everything he's been through in his life, but he is an evil person with very selfish motivations. He was, you know, a government experiment, so he is retaliating against the government for what they did to him personally. And it's not really about the politics. It's not really about, well, this is what's going to be best for the people, and the government is, you know, this horrible tyrannical system, and we need to overthrow it for the sake of the people. It's about, I was abused, so I'm going to hit back at my abusers. And one of the reasons why it doesn't work in the movie the way it works in the book is everything with his treatment of Evie makes no goddamn sense in the movie versus the book. Because in the book, he's not against mental torture. One of the very first things you see him do is drive a politician completely insane by burning all of his dolls. You know, there's this whole really interesting thing about this politician who he doesn't care about people's lives, but he adores these little dolls. And it's like this thing everyone knows about, and it's really creepy. It's like, ew, he's a grown man. Why does he have all these dolls? And V dresses up in like this vaudevillian suit with a Mr. Punch mask, and he creates like this concentration camp furnace, like, you know, like the furnaces from the Holocaust, for the dolls in order to drive this politician literally insane, and it works. And he shows up and he's wearing like this baby doll makeup, and he can only just say like, "Mama, Mama," over and over again, because that's what the dolls said. Those were their last words, so to speak. And this is the first thing you ever see him do, ever. You know, he's capable of going into these crazy depths. So when it comes to him treating Evie this way, you know, his ward, so to speak, who she's there to help him? Not really, but more so in the book than in the movie. And when he sets up this whole simulation of torture, and he shaves her head, and he starves her, and he beats her, and he keeps her in a cell, and tells her the story about Valerie, and, you know, torments her for days and nights and days and nights, and then eventually is like, oh, by the way, it was me. I did that to you. Hi. In the book, the purpose of it is to create another version of himself to excuse his own actions. He does this to somebody else in order to make them feel his pain that he feels, and to give him the vindication to do what he's doing for his own selfish motives. And
ultimately, at the end, create another version of himself.
Yes. But if my personal opinion is that wasn't exactly his intention. I mean, it didn't hurt, and it definitely worked out that way, but I think a lot of it was to vindicate his own motives, to be like, see, don't you hate somebody who's willing to do that? Shouldn't we destroy this thing, you know? Whereas in the movie, it happens because it builds character? Like, it just felt to me like Calvin and Hobbes. Like, every time Calvin's dad tells him to do some sort of chore, he's like, it built character. And it's just kind of like, you were just like this cute, wacky activist, and you did this to no. Like, and that it's things like that where it has to match the book, where everything falls apart in the movie.
Yeah, one of the interesting things is probably the only accurate piece that is retained from the graphic novel to the movie is the thing with the pedophile priest. And I think probably...
And that's another one where it's so weak in the movie compared to the book.
Well, but I think probably one of the reasons why that part was retained was because just recently there was the whole expose with the Catholic Church and, you know, hiding pedophile priests. You know, this has been going on for centuries, you know, if not millennia. But it was brought out to the public just a couple years before when the movie actually came out.
Right, of course. And the motivations for that scene remain the same, but because you changed Evie's character so much, the scene doesn't work nearly as well in the movie as it does in the books.
Well, yeah, because she's posing as a child prostitute, and the fact that she is a prostitute who's very young makes more sense in the graphic novel than it does in the movie, where all she does is doll herself up to look that way.
Right. They didn't... In the movie, it was so costumey. And Natalie Portman was, she's obviously not old, but she's clearly like mid-20s. She's clearly adult.
Yeah.
You know, for many years. And it just looked like sort of at most like a role-play fetishy thing. It wasn't even really uncomfortable except for the fact that it's a priest trying to have sex. Like, it wasn't weird, which is kind of a problem. Whereas in the book... I mean, we kind of need to address the other thing is Evie, as a character, I really kind of abhor her in the movie. All I'm talking about is how much I dislike the movie, when I like the movie quite a bit. I even like V in the movie quite a bit.
Which definitely puts Evie... you in the minority opinion, because a lot of people prefer her character and actually do not like her character in the graphic novel.
I don't like her character in the graphic novel, but she is a character in the graphic novel. She's obnoxious as hell, but she is her own person, and... as much as like she's annoying, she is a real 16-year-old prostitute trying to make her way in the world who was also dealing with a lot of mental problems and years of trauma from being in this situation, and at least like a lot more active. She's always trying to do something. You know, I'm not saying like she's a likable character, but she's a very well-developed character. And I feel so much more for her in the comic, whereas in the movie... she's an adult. She works for a news company, but she's not a journalist. She doesn't have any, like, investigative edge. She's not like an April O'Neil sort of a thing. She's so passive in the movie. She's just, oh, I was captured. Oh, well, I'll stick around here. Oh, well, now I'm with this guy, so I'll sit around here. And, oh, well, she doesn't do anything. There's not even the thing at the end where she becomes V, you know. There's nothing to her except for her kissing him at the end to be like a sort of vague love interest, which is really weird and doesn't work that well for me, and I don't really like. But at least in the books, she's a person who does things, like is actually an active agent in her own story. Whereas Natalie Portman could literally not be in the movie and it wouldn't have made a difference, really.
I disagree. She was a reporter, I think.
No, she wasn't. She passed around paperwork.
Okay.
Like, the only thing you see her do, the only reason she works at a newspaper company is because she has an ID card.
Okay.
That's the only reason why they even put her there, because she doesn't do anything with the news. She doesn't do any research. She pushes it around the little trolley and, like, hands shit out to other people. She's basically like an intern who gets paid. I don't know what you would even call that in the United States, but...
Well, it's a different form of prostitution, I guess you could say. I guess that's like some sort of like wage slaves, you know, some sort of like.
But I'm pretty sure she's well off. She dresses well. She has a nice place.
Yeah,
you know,
I guess you're
the
right
whole thing with
that.
her,
Yeah.
the whole thing with her breaking curfew, even at the very beginning of the movie, is so dumb because there's no reason for it.
Yeah, but
you know, at least in the book, when she breaks curfew to be an underage prostitute, there's a sense of desperation in that. Whereas in the movie, it's just kind of like, oh, well, weren't you kind of dumb for specifically making your date plans after hours?
yeah, the other interesting thing about the movie is it definitely feels much more like a superhero movie than the graphic novel ever did.
Well, because V is actually a hero, as opposed to an anti-hero.
Well, and you
slash protagonist villain.
You can easily see that, given the fact that the first Chris Nolan film had come out, and superheroes sort of had a resurgence in Hollywood, that this film would kind of jump on that wagon.
Right, and they definitely put a lot more like action, martial arts, fencing sort of thing. I will say I really did adore Hugo Weaving as V. I really adored him in the part, especially because it's such a difficult acting role when you're completely covered from head to toe, and you wear one mask that isn't even like a blank mask like Phantom of the Opera. It has an expression on it, and you have to emote beyond that. And you can say, oh, well, you use body language. There are scenes in the movie where he doesn't move a muscle. You can't see anything, and you know exactly what he's thinking. The scene where he's watching the movie with Evie, and they're discussing the movie a little bit, and he just gives her this look, and you can tell that he's in love with her. And he's not doing anything. He's literally just looking at her. And you can tell exactly what he's thinking. It's really brilliant.
Yeah, Hugo Weaving's performance is pretty spectacular, just as you said, given the fact that there are so many limitations to his performance.
And he was really funny. I don't really know Hugo Weaving to be a humorous actor. In The Matrix, he's kind of like, you can make fun of Mr. Anderson.
Oh, yeah, especially when it comes to the Reloaded and Revolutions. Like, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Me.
But
Me too.
But that's like mockable.
Yeah.
That's not really inviting and likable and legitimately humorous and
Right.
making jokes, like he does in the V for Vendetta movie. And I really appreciate, I'm sure he has been funny before, but I know him from Matrix and Captain America and, of course, Lord of the Rings. All I know is just serious.
Yeah, so getting back to the graphic novel, one of the big differences, and this isn't like a huge difference, but is V's mask has blush on it, which is something that they took away from the design in the movie.
Because they were worried about it being too feminine. I'm going to throw it out there. Yes, I'm going to say that's why. The comic obviously has a very, I think, gorgeous, washed out beauty to it that I really like, but there's so much involved with theatrics. And, that's very much a core theme of the book is the theatrical element, the vaudeville, the vicious cabaret, which you'll only know if you've read the trades or the Ultimate Edition, because they cut that from the normal edition for God knows what reason, because that was like 10 pages worth of shit they cut. Anyway, sorry, I shouldn't curse, says. Anyway, sorry, whoops. And then they just kind of toned everything. They toned everything back, but to be fair, they modernized it. Like, one of my favorite things that they did was the television interview. That was something that they took that fits, it's so true to the spirit for V for Vendetta, but put it in a very modern context and was so hysterical and poignant and kind of vicious. I adore that scene. That's one of the best scenes in the whole movie.
And with the Benny Hill thing.
The Benny Hill, yeah. That scene is incredible. And it speaks so well to, how do you peacefully protest? How do you, talk about the government in a way that actually works when you don't have actual power because your vote doesn't mean anything and the government's going to do whatever they want and they're a tyrannical thing. What can you do? And having that as like this illustration of how to really stick it to the government with, a right to free speech. V for Vendetta is the movie is very Americanized, obviously, because a lot of this stuff is so based on free speech, even though it takes place in Britain. But I adore everything about that whole sequence. I just thought it was so brilliant.
Yeah, I also really like the sequence where the people are donning the V mask, and it's talking about like this horrible future where, you know, everybody who's wearing the V mask is like persecuted and all that stuff, and then they spray the V on the wall. Like I really like that sequence. I think that it's really powerful, but you know, like you said, it definitely evokes a different idea than the book is trying to come across.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just you kind of have to understand that they're two dramatically different perspectives on similar ideas. And I think that that's where adaptations can really shine. You don't have to be slavishly, you know, shot for shot remake to make a good adaptation.
Yeah, and I also think that, you know, like I said, this film is extremely influential as far as like, you know, inspiring an image for a movement. You could also argue that the end of the movie, you know, maybe inspired aspects of the Occupy movement, as well as, you know, some of the Antifa stuff that's going on right now. But I'd probably say that the most influential movement that was inspired by this film, because I would argue that there are aspects of it that did inspire this, and that is the Arab Spring. Given the fact that there were members of the Arab Spring wearing the Guy Fawkes mask, and that we tried to emulate that with the Occupy movement, though the Occupy movement wasn't as strong as the Arab Spring, mostly because it was a movement kind of doomed at the beginning, because instead of planning for, you know, like organized protests, they just like said, hey, we're going to stay at this location. We're not going to move until things change. And it's like, yeah, you're going to wear a lot of people out when you do that. And I remember I actually participated in some of these protests. Obviously, I didn't like go like very far with it. I was in the military at the time, but you know, I did think that it was important to you know, defend the idea of, you know, corporations shouldn't be people. You know, the banks shouldn't be bailed out for all that kind of stuff. That was the part that I was into. Like some of the other stuff about like, you know, the hippy dippy, like let's just have like a little commune out here. Yeah, I didn't really dig into that because I didn't think it was really influencing anything. It was just, and then it turned into, unfortunately, a movement where it seemed more like a sanctuary for homeless people than actually trying to, you know, actually get anything done.
That's actually one of the things that the V for Vendetta movie really glosses over and romanticizes, is this idea of people coming together as a movement and being like one entity. It sounds so nice, but the problem with any group is that a group is a bunch of individuals. And they all have completely different ideas and thoughts and opinions, and they agree on some things and don't agree on other things and prioritize issues differently. Which is the entire purpose of having a democracy, which we don't have. But the idea of having a democracy, and the reason why we fight for a democracy, is so then what's the most important to the most amount of people can actually be applied.
Yeah,
that's the concept.
Look at what was revealed a couple days ago with the DNC. Like,
you mean what we all already knew for 2 years?
Yeah, but it's hilarious that the party
breaking news.
Yeah, but the party that claims that it's, you know, the Democratic Party, the party that stands for democracy, was so undemocratic in their methods.
They've always been against democracy. We've always known that. You know, they've always been fixing elections in other countries. Why wouldn't they fix the one in their own country? It's ridiculous. And
don't even get me started on Republicans, because, you know, anything that Democrats do, Republicans have probably done like 3, 4, 5 times worse.
Including in the election. But, you know.
Yeah, Donald Trump did not win fair and square. Like his fake news, or whatever you want to call it.
Alternative facts, whatever. Right. But going exactly on this issue, what I did really like in the movie, that they, like I said, is true to the spirit of the original, but is really modernized, is the way that people interact with the news and the way that people interact with their television specifically. It's really, I thought that it was really genuine, that they show the media as pumping out bullshit, fake nonsense, fluff pieces, hiding the facts, and showing the way that people interact with it. You know, you have the people who create that content who just puff up their own ego. You know, you had that scene in the shower where he's listening to his own interview and he's like getting all riled up about it. I could totally picture Donald Trump or Bill Maher doing the exact same thing. And there's also a lot of situations of normal people watching their TV and going, that's bullshit. I know that's not true. And when they see V or they see the Benny Hill thing, you know, they see like Gordon's piece on the air, they're like, oh, I'm smart enough to see that's actually what's going on in the world. That's why I'm laughing at that, is because I'm actually intelligent enough to not believe every little thing that comes in one ear and out the other, which I think was a little more than a little bit problematic with the original series, and I really appreciate the movie for addressing, is that we have such a problem right now of this complete disconnect with what the media says and what people actually say and think. And we see this across all sorts of issues. We saw this with Gamergate. We see this with, you know, American politics. We see this with political issues. We see this with social issues. We see this with media coverage. We see this with a lot of stuff where what people say and what it's reported that happens or what is reported that people say or believe is completely different. Like, I mean, obviously, when you look at our political system, there's a huge problem in our so-called democracy where our president is the 5th president to not win a popular vote, where Congress has a 12% approval rating. We voted for them. How do they have a 12% approval rating? That's insane. You see studies by Harvard and Stanford that prove that there is a 0% correlation between what happens politically and what people actually want. That's insane. But you see this all the time with a lot of other social issues, like with the Russia thing. Most people, I think it's like 62%, I'm not entirely sure, I don't have the study in front of me, but 62% of Americans, not Democrats, not Republicans, not independents, Americans, believe that the Russia scandal, like investigating the Russia scandal and commentating on the Russia scandal and you know, doing all of this media coverage of it, is doing more harm than good.
Yeah, because it's, you know, essentially presenting issues that, you know, don't speak to the core of what Americans want is bullshit. But also, like, pressing a story where you don't have any factual evidence and it's, you know, essentially just conspiracy theory is not good for your credibility. Mm-hmm. And when we're jailing journalists, which we did back in, what was it, 2013, 2014?
Didn't they just push an act to make whistleblowing illegal too?
Yeah, they did. That was actually just pushed. And
they're trying to destroy net neutrality, which again, most Americans...
Now, to clarify the whistleblowing rule, what they're saying is you can't whistleblow to the media. They're saying like, oh, you have to whistleblow through your agencies or the agencies that we present, which
yeah, it's a joke.
Yeah, good luck for that information.
But again, that's highlighting this disproportion between, not disproportion, but this just like complete lack of connection between the people and the media that's supposed to report on what the people need to know about.
Well, yeah, and unfortunately, it's making our country more and more polarized to the point where, for the longest time, I didn't think another civil war was possible in the United States, but like we're getting to the point where no matter what's going on in Washington, that is possible. Because we are presenting things, and yeah, you know, some people might say, oh, you know, it's the alt-right and the Antifa, like having a war against each other.
And this is where a lot of that discrepancy with the media comes in, is because so many of these things are so much smaller than they're played up to be. We see this constantly. Like we saw this I'm going to give like 3 different examples to show like how different this is. When Mad Max Fury Road came out, there was this huge media outcry about, oh, men's rights activists are all boycotting Mad Max Fury Road because it's too feminist. And isn't that appalling? When it's literally one dude in Australia, I think he's in Australia, one dude from Return of Kings, I think is what it is.
Was it in Australia? Because I thought he was in Chicago, because like there was...
They had a rally here, but okay. I don't think that this one dude who wrote this particular piece was there. But it's one dude who has said multiple times that he's not an MRA and does not identify as such, saying that he doesn't want to see the movie, which, you know, too bad for him because it's a good movie. Every single article I read could only cite this one asshole. That's not a movement. That is not a kerfuffle. Like, calm down, people. That's not even worth reporting on. It's one dude. Calm down. We saw this with the Russia, where they tried to push this story that Russian meddlers hired Black Lives Matter activists to make a YouTube video rapping about how terrible Hillary Clinton is and how amazing Donald Trump is and how horrible that is. And they created this to influence the election when that YouTube video had 260 views. Yeah, that's nothing. Nobody watched that. That's not
We're not even a channel that has that many viewers, and we've got more than 260 views on our stuff. Like, and none of our stuff is newsworthy.
Well, yeah, we're not the news.
Right.
We say we talk all the time, but we're never going to sit here and tell you to your face what we are saying is the truth and you need to believe this because this is what's going on in the world.
Oh, you need to be skeptical of everything you hear on the news, everything you hear from YouTubers. You need to be skeptical about anything that comes from a source that you didn't even see. In fact, you should be even skeptical of that because, you know, we already know that memory plays tricks on us. So, like...
Well, also, a lot of articles will only have a citation. And when you click on that citation, it's another article from another location that says almost verbatim the exact same thing. And they have one citation. And you click on that. And then you start to realize that there are 25 articles that all got their source from one tweet that somebody posted one time. And it's like, dude, really? You just blew up something out of nothing. Like, come on. And there is sort of a danger in the media of giving such a huge platform to such a tiny group of people. You know, I think that's a big part of the reason why we're seeing this huge thing of, you know, well, let me say seemingly huge thing of white supremacists and Confederates and, you know, really bullshit people. It's not that, oh, they just sprung up out of nowhere. They've always existed. They've always been assholes. But here's the thing. Until very recently, when they've been seen, they have expressed their views and they were told that they were stupid. They've had their little shows or their protests or whatever, and nobody paid attention. Now, all of a sudden, you know, there's this big movement of, oh, if you do anything at all, we're going to give you this huge platform and we're going to have cameras on you, we're going to have recordings on you, and we're going to have dozens, even hundreds of articles about you and what you said and your movement, and we're going to give you like this huge platform to spread your message everywhere.
Yeah.
And in a completely one-sided way, not in a debate, not in a forum, not on a one-on-one where you can say your piece and somebody else can say their piece. It's just a thing of, oh, now this, you know, group of, you know, maybe 10 people, maybe 35 people, suddenly becomes this huge thing that becomes ridiculously influential. Which is kind of what V for Vendetta is about one dude becoming, like, incredibly influential. Just on the other side of the coin.
Yeah, so Eval79 says, I hated this movie when I was young, but now I love it. It's amazing and very important. A guy on YouTube did a commentary of the movie, and he explains it with real-life events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I know I kind of shat on it for a couple of elements, and I stand by that. But overall, I respect their different take on the same idea, and I don't agree with everything that the movie is trying to say. But I think that there's a huge amount of artistry to the way they say it. I appreciate how they try to modernize things and make everything very contextual and very relevant. I know V for Vendetta came out several years ago, but like I said, you can take so many moments from that movie and apply it to our modern day political situations. You know, it's kind of like South Park. It's just irreverent. It's just, oh, this is such an accurate take on what the institution of our political system is like, and the institution of our media outlook, that it's still applicable.
Right. Going on to the TV show that's coming out, I think one of the interesting things that, you know, the comic did, which was, you know, talk about issues that were relevant towards its time. And then the movie did the same thing. There's a lot to get into if you're going to adapt it into a TV show that would be interesting. Doing a straight adaptation, you know, while that would be desired for many people, I think that the work should stand on its own. And I would actually prefer if many aspects of it were faithful to the graphic novel, but it did incorporate some of the stuff that's going on with our time.
Well, when it came out, V for Vendetta was a dystopian future. But it was a dystopian future of its time. So the time period that it's supposed to take place in has already passed.
Yeah,
chronologically to where we are now, versus, you know, there's such a huge difference between radio and television. And then, of course, between television and the internet. And especially nowadays, where we live in a day and age where YouTubers have so much more sway and influence and views than news. You know, what does Donald Trump listen to? He listens to Alex Jones. But who does Sean Hannity listen to? He listens to Alex Jones.
Which is why YouTube has changed their algorithm system, because I guarantee you news agencies and various other people from the media have pressured YouTube to make sure that, you know,
essentially any independent political correspondent is being minimized on YouTube. They can't out and out censor them, but they're minimizing them as much as they possibly can
make it so
to promote the real news sources that nobody pays attention to because nobody believes them. There's a reason why people will listen to Alex Jones or Secular Talk, and I'm not putting them on the same platform.
Do not.
Well, I kind of am, because they're on the same platform.
Okay.
They're both political commentators on YouTube, and I'm using them because they're such opposite ends of the spectrum. But there's a reason why they both have more viewers and more, to be really generous and kind of barfing in my mouth a little bit, believers of their content, is because we don't believe the news anymore. To the point where, like, CNN is trying to put out propaganda to make themselves seem more believable and more credible, because nobody believes their bullshit. You know, they've been, you know, so hugely Russia, and then they recently came out with this ad that's like, this is an apple. People will tell you it's a banana, but we're here to tell you that this is an apple. Facts first. And it's like, our saviors. Do you know why you need to say that to begin with? Because no one believes your shit. People will believe Alex Jones or Secular Talk. Again, I'm not saying that their work is on the same level, but they're in the same platform because, to a certain extent, they are held to the standards of the people. They are. Alex Jones is held to the standard of his followers, and Secular Talk is held to the standards of his followers. You know, if they say bullshit, they get called out on it very publicly. There will be video responses. You know, there will be things that go viral. And we kind of have that with normal media. You know, there will be article responses. But that's the media talking about the media to itself to promote the media. It's really different than the actual people being able to directly interact with people and say, hey, fuck Nugget. You're bullshit. You know?
Yeah, Eval79 said you can put Jones on the same level as Bill Maher now. Yeah, I would agree.
Thank you for saying it, because I've been saying for forever, Bill Maher is the
Alex Jones of the left.
No, I was gonna say he's the corporate Democratic Donald Trump because he talks just like Trump, which is funny because he won't shut up about Trump and how much he hates him.
Isn't it, wouldn't Hillary be better? Look at how horrible Trump is. Wouldn't Hillary be better? Is like literally his only talking points nowadays.
But here's what he does. He has people on his show.
And let's not forget the point where he, used racial slurs to make a point.
Oh my God, yeah. And he was just like, sorry guys, whoops. No. But this is the reason why I say like he's just like Donald Trump. He'll have people on his show, and as soon as they make they'll be there to talk about an issue, and the other person will be there. They'll be ready to talk about their issue, and Bill Maher will be like, so we're talking about this issue, and we're talking about this issue. And if Hillary Clinton was president, this wouldn't even be a thing. Don't you agree? And as soon as they're like, well, no, actually, because of this, this, and this, and as soon as they try to lay out facts, he's like, wrong, nope, wrong. And he'll do that until they have to cut to commercial, and he can literally like push someone off. He refuses to give his platform to anybody with a differing opinion. He'll just be like, wrong, no, wrong.
And we don't just see this with Bill Maher. We see it with the large plethora of different media commentators from both the left and the right. And
usually it's because you can follow the money on it.
Yeah.
And this is what getting back to V for Vendetta for a minute, this is what I'm talking about with this disconnect between the people and the media. There was actually a poll that came out recently, and this gives me a lot of pride in people, like American people and American viewers. The people who actually have to sit there and take all this crap from the media and has to take all this, on a daily basis. It was Russia. It was Russian meddling. They hacked our elections. Well, not really. They just hacked our Pokemon Go and Black Lives Matters and Standing Rock activist movements. Not really. The people who have to sit
Facebook
there. And they got us with their Facebook memes. Yes. But here's the thing. The people who listen to that garbage get shoveled in one ear and out the other day after day after day, who have to listen to Democrats like Nancy Pelosi say, well, the Democratic Party needs me because I'm a great fundraiser. People who the train wreck that was all of the debates on both sides. Guess what they say the number one, the two biggest problems are in American politics right now? Guess what? More than half of the American public say the two biggest problems are.
The fact that they don't speak to poor people and working class people, I would say.
They said that the two biggest problems in politics right now, as in the two biggest obstacles to having functioning politics, are money in politics and big money donors, which is essentially the same thing. Yeah, people are intelligent. They can smell bullshit. They know when they're being lied to their faces, and they know when the media doesn't have a point. And I do appreciate that the Wachowskis did have, they weren't just like, don't be sheeple, you guys. It was about illustrating the powerlessness that intelligent citizens feel.
Yeah, but at the same time, at the ending, essentially they become sheeple to an anarchist movement, which,
is the problem with the movie. And it's the romanticizing of the anarchist movement, for sure, because they just all form one identity and all become one cohesive unit without their own individual thoughts. And
I know that there are tons of people that think that the hive mind is like the way to go, and we're seeing this in our future. Like, our future is becoming more of a hive mind. Now, I don't know where that's going to lead to because, quite frankly, I'm not somebody who's versed in, skeptical. I can't look at the patterns like, the creator of Black Mirror or anything like that. But I can say that, this hive mind, is not going away. The only way it would go away is literally if you destroyed the internet, which
please don't destroy the internet. Exactly. That's what we're fighting for the love of God. Don't destroy the internet.
Ajit Pai would say differently.
Oh, God. I have so many things I want to say, but I would be libeled if I said them. Moving on. what does really excite me about Channel 4 is, you know, they did come out with Black Mirror, and doing a Black Mirror style take on V for Vendetta, I think, can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, hell, look at their first episode.
Look at every single episode they've ever made.
Right. But, you know, I do think it's really interesting that, you know, the show for its very first episode is like, yeah, we're going to go there. And if that's too much for you, you don't have to watch the show.
Well, actually, what I think is really interesting about that first episode, that is true. But also, what I think is so interesting is that it was so insightful that it was all actually true and they didn't know. Supposedly. Maybe somebody knew. You know, word gets around in unofficial capacities, but...
Yeah, and we could easily see this happening, the Shut Up and Dance episode. Spoiler alert, if you have not seen Black Mirror's Shut Up and Dance episode, because I'm about to spoil aspects of it. And what I'm saying is this whole thing with the Harvey Weinstein situation that's going on, I could see people on the internet using that as blackmail to get people to do things. You know, that could, that episode, that could be the future. You know, if you have dirt on you, people on the internet might... That's a huge
problem that we're facing right now with things like doxing, though. I mean...
doxing is a little bit...
With things like doxing.
Right. You know, it's...
What I'm saying is, like, when you have real-life phenomenon of doxing and swatting, you know, a military coming into your home, or the public having access to your private information, like really dangerous personal information being released to the public now that, you know, that is such a real option. Terror tactics have dramatically escalated, I would say.
So,
and even when you have things like the Equifax leak, like that is mind-blowing.
So Eval79 asks, that's what I don't get. How does the establishment allow certain content to come out?
What is that? I need a little bit of clarification there. I don't know how to answer that.
Okay. I think what they're getting at is the whole idea of the fact that, you know, V for Vendetta is like a commentary on this sort of thing.
The whole thing was like Gordon sort of running rogue and putting out his own commentary sort of thing versus what the government told him he was allowed to do.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting aspect that the movie provides, that I think that if you were going to do a more modern adaptation of, you could, you know, incorporate like YouTube and et cetera, which could comment on some of that stuff.
Right. I mean, you would have to do like made-up companies, obviously. You can't literally have YouTube, and
I'm sure you could. I mean, look at Mr. Robot.
You could, but there... Oh, that's true. Mr. Robot kind of always blows my mind with how much it slanders like really big, actual real-world name brands like Starbucks, McDonald's, YouTube. That's true. That's a good point. I will say one of the biggest improvements from the book that I think the movie did was Gordon. I think Gordon is really bland in the book, and him as a love interest is rather obnoxious. Versus in the movie, I really love his character, and I love his agency, and I love how they incorporated him as sort of like an alternate V, where he has his own collection of art and like preservation. But it would work better if they had something closer to the original V, where he is kind of, you know, there was sort of a good version and an evil version of doing the same thing. But I really like that idea that they were playing up of, you know, him sort of doing the same thing and this like-mindedness happening across the country. You know, V's not actually that special because other people are tapping into the same idea. You know, it's very The Matrix, obviously, where multiple people are realizing the same truth about the world without being told it. And
yeah, there is sort of a singularity idea that almost all the Wachowskis' material kind of alludes to.
Absolutely. And then, of course, everything with his talk show I just thought was so much better. And then the way that, you know, he really risks his neck to go rogue and put out this really funny biting commentary and that message does reach a mass amount of people. You know, you see all the people who are watching it and going like, yeah, that is what it's like. Absolutely. You know, and they're taking this message to heart. And then obviously he pays for it with his life in like this really brutal act of censorship. I mean, again, it's such an American concept of anti-censorship, but it is so important, and especially in our age of fighting for net neutrality, it's still incredibly relevant. I mean, you could also say in our age of, you know, man, it's snowflakes, you don't want people to speak at their school, and yes, that too, but that's just not on the same scale as net neutrality.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of people losing their rights, and this is coming both from, you know, liberal platforms and conservative platforms of, you know, people being hindered from speech.
There are people who lose their jobs because of things that they say, and you know, sometimes you'll see funny things on the internet, like the girl in Kentucky who said, you know, I am a server at this Starbucks at this city in Kentucky, and if you come here and you order this drink, I will spit in your order. I've been fired. You know, that's different than there was specifically a case of a man in Canada who had a political disagreement with two women on Twitter and was put in jail for 3 or 4 years and lost his livelihood.
Well,
and
to be fair,
Canada
doesn't have the same free speech laws that we have in the United States.
No, they don't, but it's a similar idea. I mean, part of the thing of V for Vendetta is that it does need to have a certain universal quality. Obviously, the original book takes place in England, and then the movie takes place in England, but it's talking definitely a lot about an American perspective on politics.
Well, yeah, V for Vendetta was, you know, a direct response to Thatcherism. Mm-hmm. You know, Margaret Thatcher was a very dictatorial leader. What
about people who are there are so many cases of this where people are outed on Twitter, you know, like, oh, this person was at a white supremacist rally. I found his name, his address, and where he works. I reported that he was at this political event on his free time, not talking to the media, not representing his company. I went and I found out where he worked, and I told his boss that he was there, and he got fired and he lost his job.
Well, yeah, and
I don't agree with that person being at a white supremacist rally, and if I was an employer, that would disgust me. But we do have, you know, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of, you know, it's not put in this context, but we do have a freedom of political ideas in America.
Well, you know, the right would argue that certain movements and all that stuff are, you know, rejecting their religious freedom. You know, they try to argue that, you know, anything that's against Christianity is like against their freedom of expression of religion and all that kind of stuff, right, which is like a really weird backwards thought that they have to use to like justify basically bigotry. Well, and also basically advocating for censorship and, you know, hindering free speech, you know, to say like, oh, well, you're hindering my religion, so therefore, you know, et cetera. I mean, we see this with, you know, anti-Muslim sentiment that, you know, sometimes both members of the left and right will be criticized for, you know, if they say anything, you know, that is offensive to, you know, Muslims, partly because they'll fucking kill people, you know, not saying that, but that is something that does happen.
Right, but what I'm trying to get at is like, to bring it into a real world example, I worked at a job where me and my boss had a discussion that related to the issue of, you know, to put it nicely, and try not to barf in my mouth, pro-life versus pro-choice. We had an actual conversation about that. What if he turned around and he fired me for my position on that? That would be wrong, wouldn't it? I mean, besides, that would be a form of bigotry, and that would be a form of, in a sense, censorship. Even though I wasn't representing the company in that situation, I wasn't talking to customers, I wasn't like doing anything public.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a position where like you take a photo of one guy in a crowd, you know, what if this had happened the other way around? What if somebody was at like the March Against Trump, you know, with the pussy caps, and somebody had taken her photo? She didn't talk to the media. She wasn't wearing any paraphernalia from her work. She wasn't representing her company. She was using her freedom of speech to express her political opinion on her own time. And somebody took her photo and put it up on Twitter and said, by the way, this is who she is. This is her name. We're going to find out where she works. We're going to tell her boss that she was there. And if her boss doesn't agree with her being there, she'll get fired. And that's what we want to happen. And she got fired. That would be so fucked up.
Yeah, I saw a documentary that Vice made just recently about the Antifa movement, like some of the people, you know, fighting for Antifa, and, you know, they all wear black as a way to, you know, be hard to distinguish. They also have, you know, the face masks and all that kind of stuff, which, you know, definitely evokes a certain idea. But
it's also more necessary than it's ever been before. It's
also more necessary, and it homogenizes the entire group to be hard to distinguish one for another. But like the same thing goes, just, you know, you could be, you know, anti-fascist, and, you know, if people find a way to figure out who you are, they will.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really messed up. And it kind of lends a little bit of credence to everybody wearing a V for Vendetta mask, you know, Guy Fawkes kind of style mask, and being one of the crowd, because
there were
that's
a lot
the
of
only
people,
way to protect yourself.
I mean, there have been a lot of people who have been a part of the anonymous movement who have been outed for, you know, white hat and black hat hacking. You know, there are several times where, you know, I've seen various posts, and it is really interesting because, you know, in the vein of V for Vendetta, there are many people who don the Guy Fawkes mask, or, you know, use it as an avatar or whatever, that, you know, come from all different walks of life, come from all different philosophical and social mindsets. And there is no one clear idea of anonymous, because it is sort of supposed to be this, you know, abstract movement. I did hear some people
Although sometimes it does need a little bit more direction, I think.
Right. And, you know, I've talked to some people that said, oh, anonymous is one guy. And I was like, get the fuck out of here.
No
you know, and, you know, there's this argument about anonymous and anons, which are like two different groups.
Things, yeah.
Like anons are like more like, you know, the casual type of people. You know, sometimes they're very proficient in hacking, but, you know, they like to shit post. They like to, you know, put things out to, you know, troll the internet.
Right.
And, you know, that this whole idea of hacktivist versus, you know, people doing it for the lulz is oftentimes meshed in with this Guy Fawkes V for Vendetta mask. And I actually wrote a paper on this. I'm really sorry I mentioned this before, but you know, it's just one of those things when you clean out your computer, you don't always have things at the ready. I do have it on my hard drive. I will try to put it up in some capacity to try to talk about this, but I essentially said that the Guy Fawkes mask that people are exclaiming and, you know, essentially using in their form of protest has nothing to do with Guy Fawkes himself. Like, Guy Fawkes was very much an establishment person. Like, he was advocating, you know, against the Catholic Church for the crap. I can't remember. I know this is terrible. I wrote a paper on it, but I can't remember.
Well, just from what you've said, it sounds slightly Bernie Sanders-y and like trying to, you know, the establishment is good, but needs to be reformed from the inside.
Yeah. And not, I mean, we've gotten like really political with this podcast because, you know,
How can you not? And even though we've kind of gone off on tangents, I think that it does prove a lot about both the V for Vendetta graphic novel and the V for Vendetta movie, that when you talk about it, you immediately apply it to all these different political ideas and sort of philosophical ideas and, you know, sort of intangible ideologies and, you know, idealistically, what would you want and how do you think things should work? And they're so relevant still. Both of them are.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about the graphic novel that you don't really get in the movie is essentially the failed rebellion at the end. It's so glorious how, like, you know, they have this uprising and then they just fight each other, because that's pretty much how all movements go when you give it time.
Right.
I can't think of a single violent movement that hasn't backfired to some capacity.
Right. I mean, there's a reason why Martin Luther King is more of a popular figure than Malcolm X. And I'm not trying to shit on Malcolm X by any means. I'm just making a point. Regardless
of... Well, his movement was successful, and Malcolm X was killed by his own people.
Well, I mean, they were both murdered. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Like, they were both murdered. I wouldn't call either of those... I wouldn't call that outcome in any capacity successful necessarily, but they
were influential. Like they both succeeded in that
but
way.
They're both hugely influential. I think it does come down to a thing of, regardless of what your own personal parameters are on violence, whether you think that you need to be violent or you need to enact violence, or if it's okay in this situation but not this situation, the American public in general is not comfortable with the idea of violence mixing with politics. Which is funny because that's a lot of what the V for Vendetta movie idealizes and romanticizes, is one dude doing the violence for the sake of everyone else to sort of be spared from doing it. Because it is this very cool, like, oh, isn't it cool how he does these martial arts? And isn't that cool how he just straight up murders people? It's not like any of his followers are doing anything like that, because he's kind of the Jesus-y figure of doing it so they don't have to, kind of thing.
Well, and it was very much a commentary on the war on terror at its time. You know, I mean, the fact that, you know, you could put a dinger on the film, how many times they say terrorist in the film, you know, and take a shot and be wasted. He is a terrorist. I was just saying that, like, it is.
Well, isn't Edward Snowden a terrorist?
According to some people, yes.
Isn't he a terrorist? Isn't WikiLeaks? Isn't that an act of cyber terrorism?
There would be tons of people, especially on the Hillary Clinton side, that would agree with that.
I don't know if it's tons of people. I would say that it's very loud people.
Yeah, that is true.
There's a difference.
That is one thing that's interesting about a lot of movements. It's usually the person and people who speak the loudest that are the ones that wind up representing a movement, whether or not they actually represent a movement or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, kind of moving forward from these ideas onto what I would like to see in a TV show. I would prefer it to be a miniseries. If I was writing it, I would format it in the style of the graphic novel. You know, it's put into chapters. It's also put into volumes. I guess you could do like seasons as volumes and episodes as chapters, but really I would just sort of by chapters the way it kind of is in the book. And there are many scenes I would really like to keep from the book. There's a scene that's just absolutely hysterical where V presents a Valentine for Lady Justice. And there's like this whole speech that he gives her, and like he has like this breakup with her, and then the Valentine is a bomb. I adore that scene. It's so funny, but it's so potent in its like disdain for the symbol of, you know, the symbol of justice that has been perverted by the corruption of government. that I really enjoy. And there are a lot of themes in the book that I really like. Like, I like the theatrical element of the book. We've actually been watching the show Mindhunter, and there's this whole Goff said that every person is like an actor and they have a mask that they wear on the stage, but everybody has to have a backstage where they can take off their mask and be themselves. And I think that a theme like that fits V for Vendetta really well, and it would be really interesting to see that applied to V, see that applied to Evie, see that applied to, you know, the voice, see that applied to the hand, see that applied to Gordon, and see how all these different people in all these different positions have their mask and their backstage. I think that that would be really, really interesting. There are a lot of scenes in the book I would like to see. Like, there's a scene where Evie and V are dancing. They have like a disco ball and the jukebox is playing, and it kind of brings up this really kind of complicated moment where Evie's like, "Are you my father?" Which I think if that particular element is adapted, will need a lot of clarity from the book. But I definitely didn't like it in the movie when they took the father-daughter angle and switched it to a love interest angle, because that was creepy coming from the book to the movie. But I think that there's like such an adorable intimacy in that moment that wasn't ever recreated in the movie. I'd like to see something like that. And I would really like to see...
I like the piece that was used in that scene by Cat People, I think was the band.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like that moment.
Yeah.
You know, it's... I get what you're saying, like, as far as context, but I think there is something still valuable in that scene.
I don't disagree. I really don't. I would really like to keep a lot of the, because we can do this now in television. We couldn't when the V for Vendetta movie came out, and I still say in some areas movies are even more restricted than television is. But
certainly,
definitely. So I would like to see a lot of the really dark elements of V for Vendetta come out. I would really like to see a lot of the torture, a lot of the mental anguish, a lot of the darker elements of characters and selfish motivations come out. I would like to see a lot of that. I would really like to see the dolls. I think that that's a beautifully cinematic moment. I would really love to see that. That's such a disturbing moment. It would be really great to see something like that happen. And also like the scene with the rose, which was in the movie, and I think that the movie did a great job adapting it from the book. I would like to see like that sort of thing repeated. Everything with Valerie, I think, is done very, very well in both the book and the movie. And it's going to be hard to do that again. You know, there are certain elements that are done so well both times. I don't know how they're going to do it a third time and do their own take on it. But Valerie is so important thematically. And it's just, it would be impossible to do the story without her. So I would be really curious to see how they'll handle that element of it. I'd love to hear a rendition of Vicious Cabaret. I would love to hear that because the sheet music is in the comic. You know, there's a melody that goes with it. There's lyrics. Seeing a montage go with it would be really great.
And that's only in the extended version, like...
Or the trades, if you have them.
Yeah, the trades. So if you've just read the one-volume piece, the paperback that you
probably found at a half-price books like I did.
Yeah, if you've only read that version, you haven't
it's not
really gotten the full experience of V for Vendetta.
You really haven't, but which is a shame because there are stuff that's cut out where I'm like, no, this isn't bonus content. This is integral. Like, what are you doing? But I would really love to hear Vicious Cabaret. I've kind of skimmed over a lot of the side characters, like the investigator and the woman who's cheating on her husband. Because a lot of that's... the investigator is really boring in the movie, and honestly, I don't think he's much better in the book. There are certain elements like that where I'm just kind of like, please do something more spicy with it. Like, please try to give more than has been given in both versions, because I honestly think it's weak in both cases in comparison to like the main storylines.
Yeah, and I really like Stephen Ray as an actor, but he did the best he could in that performance, but he wasn't given much.
One other thing that I'm really excited to see is if/how, they better do it or I'll be pissed, but I'm really excited to see how they have Storm Saxon. And this is one of the reasons why I'm like, the movie is actually a really good adaptation that is, has an understanding of the source material. There's a TV show in V for Vendetta called Storm Saxon, and it's sort of this propaganda piece that's on TV. It's just kind of what people watch on TV when they're not watching the media. It's just like the TV show everyone watches. And they have that in the background in the movie as well. But in the movie, it's like a completely different show. So just like with everything else, in terms of its political perspective and its take on the characters, Storm Saxon is like completely different renditions. So it'll be really interesting to compare like the 3 different versions of Storm Saxon.
Yeah, what I could see is if you were actually making it not a miniseries, but actually making it a TV show, one thing that could be interesting is like really embellishing and expanding on the city itself.
I feel like you can do that in a miniseries.
You can. I'm just saying, like, if you wanted to make like side characters and stuff like that, one of the things that I really love about Watchmen is the 2 people at the newspaper stand, the kid that reads the comic books and everything like that. I love that relationship. It's something so minute, and then you also have the lesbians and everything like that.
I know some people were like, why wasn't the Black Freighter in the movie? Or like, even, this is more understandable to me, why wasn't the giant squid in the movie? And I was like, why weren't the lesbians in the movie? Because it's not as important to the plot, but it's definitely really important to the themes.
Well, yeah, and that's a theme that Alan Moore constantly came back to because, at the time they were persecuted. And he was one of the few, I mean, they've always been persecuted, but, at the time he was one of the few like pop media people talking about it.
Right, exactly. And that was another interesting thing that the movie changed from the book that I really appreciated. It was making Gordon gay.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, there is a Watchmen TV adaptation coming to HBO, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, I'm really excited about because it's from the creators of, I know you weren't too hot on the show, but I definitely need to get back to it. The creators of, what was that show with?
The Leftovers?
Yes.
Okay.
I
don't think The Leftovers is a bad show. It's not my taste.
Yeah.
That's all.
And that's perfectly understandable. The show has a very deliberate pace. I heard it definitely picks up once the second season comes, and then it gets a lot better after that. But there's
so many amazing shows that there are certain shows where I'm like, I'm sure it's a great show, and I didn't see anything that I disliked about it. But I have shows that I love right now that I have to keep up with.
I'm definitely going to get back to it because, I'll rewatch it again just to get the context and everything. And then I'll let you know if it's a show that you need to invest in because it's a 3-season show, which isn't a huge investment. That's still an investment, but, that's not like, oh, hey, there's this show that's, it's not like recommending like, Supernatural that's on like its 12th or 13th season. Did that show end finally?
It's going too soon, I think.
Oh, okay.
And also, it's more than 13. I think it had 17 seasons.
Jesus Christ.
Dude, I don't watch the show. I don't know. Going back to what I was saying, like looking forward to the show, I would like it to be more faithful to the book version of V and the book version of Evie. But I would like it to be like the movie in modernizing the technology, modernizing the way that we interact with politics. It's intelligent take on the way that people consume media. And I think that there's a lot of beauty in the way that it's shot. And I do appreciate a lot of the humorous moments, although I think the book has humorous moments too. And definitely I thought Gordon obviously was a vast improvement. And I think that taking some of its like more modern political terminology and visuals would definitely be helpful. But I really am hoping that the show can stand on its own feet outside of the movie and outside of the TV or outside of the books. I would love it to be more. This is such a hot button word. I don't even know why, but it is. I would really love there to be more diversity. And I mean that in every element. It would be great if we had more diversity in orientation, if we had more diversity in race, and if we had more diversity in the political spectrum. It's easy to shout, you know, oh, everybody come together as one and be, you know, be unified when you're not speaking very directly on the political issues. Different people have different political ideas. You know, there are definitely populist issues that a majority of America can agree on, for sure. But, you know, what's really interesting about populist issues, and again, this is getting into American politics, but populist issues tend to transcend political party. You can have Democrats and Republicans agree on the same populist issues that politicians won't give the time of day. And taking that idea, and it's not like that isn't also happening in Britain, I'm sure, but I'm obviously not quite as intimately familiar with British politics as I am with American politics. But seeing that idea of a diversity in political issues and trying to find unity beyond party and beyond religion and beyond race and beyond orientation and beyond, you know, world viewpoints. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they, if that's something they even attempt to tackle, because they might just try to be like, the left is good, but... Well,
I do think that they will try to, you know, acknowledge that to a certain point, because let's face it, the, you know, biggest political movement in the past couple of years was Brexit, which they, you know, experienced, and, you know, a lot of that stuff was intertwined with that. So,
but Brexit is a great example of like really odd populist issues, because was there a racist component to Brexit? Yes. Yes, undeniably. And people who try to deny it are willfully trying to bullshit on you on the issue. And I am specifically talking about Sargon. He knows there's a racist element. But there are also a lot of other elements to it that aren't racist, you know, and that aren't, oh, the right versus the left. There are a lot of economical perspectives to that. There are a lot of legal perspectives to that you could talk about. And that's how something like Brexit happens. You know, like the sort of like populist upheaval. Of course, Brexit is also interesting because I'm an American and I'm like, wait. You guys had like a political issue and like the citizens voted on it? What? We don't vote on anything.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, our votes don't matter, but also...
Actually, that's not 100% true. In local elections, you do vote on certain
You vote on like two things. You vote on like literally two issues that only affect you locally. And besides that, you only vote for representatives. So regardless of whether or not you think democracy is broken, there are so many political issues we don't have any say in. How are our taxes spent? Do we stay in a war? Do we, you know, do we raise the minimum wage? Do we not raise the minimum wage? Do we convert from, you know, the Affordable Care Act to Medicare for all or a single payer system? You know, what do we think of, you know, again, you know, contraceptives being covered by insurance, or Viagra being covered by insurance, or, you know, what insurance covers or doesn't cover, or pre-existing conditions, or rebuilding our infrastructure, or, you know, bringing it back to Brexit, you know, or our ability to bring in refugees or to not bring in refugees, or how do we want to deal with immigration? Do we want to build a wall or not build a wall? You know, these are huge core issues that everybody talks about to no end that we don't get any political say in. We don't get to vote on that. Are you kidding? We don't get to say yes or no. That's ridiculous. We vote for representatives who may or may not actually represent us.
Well, yeah, that's because our system is broken, but our system has never been
worked.
Yeah, exactly. It's just been.
This isn't new.
Well, you know, it started out with landowners, then it changed to be white people. Then we got rid of that, and it was still against women, and then we got rid of that.
And black people.
Well, yeah, you know, black people and women have always kind of been screwed over, but to a lesser extent as the years have followed.
Who gets a slice of the bread loaf first? How about everybody?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, populist left ideas are, at least for me, the way to go. Granted, some people would argue populist right ideas, and, well, right now we're dealing with that.
Well, and well, here's a really interesting, and again, this is an American issue.
Yeah.
But this would be something super interesting to see them tackle in a setting like V for Vendetta. Green energy. Okay, well, how does this look? Well, on the left, you have people who are like, well, we need to save the planet. And on the right, you have people who say, we need to save our jobs. And our jobs are mining and, you know, coal and oil refinery. That's our jobs. We want to keep our jobs. And you have people on the left who are like, well, oil is polluting the water and coal is polluting the air and it's not good for our environment and we want to take that away. Then you have the populist opinion, which is something like the OFF Act or the Green New Deal, where it's like, okay, we're going to make a general shift from, you know, from coal and oil and fossil fuels to green energy by developing new technology and specifically putting a job replacement program to put the people who were already working in mining and oil refinery and that kind of stuff as the forefront people working in the new burgeoning green energy industry to keep that going, where they're going to have better health, they're going to have better jobs because their jobs aren't as dangerous and aren't as likely to, you know, kill them. They're going to have a better life because they're living on a cleaner planet, and they're going to be the first people in line to have these good jobs. There you go. That's supposed to be the idea of a democracy, is you have two people on two different sides with two different ideas, and then you come up with a compromise in the middle that makes everybody happy. And by the way, this is something that's happening all over the world, except America, and I think also the UK, but I'm not entirely sure about that.
Yeah.
It would be really interesting to see like a really topical modern issue like that discussed in a V for Vendetta style forum. That would be really interesting. I would love to see stuff like that happen, or like healthcare. You know, living wage is something that hugely affects both America and the UK. Doing something about like poverty and living wage and high land prices and
I mean, look at the case
rates.
Where
that would be interesting.
Look at the case where you had a company cut corners to an apartment, and practically everybody who was inside that apartment, you know, at the time were incinerated because they didn't meet the standards to the health code for that apartment. And so many people died. And that fire went on for so long. And there's no reason why that fire should have gone on for that long. But it's because they cut corners, which put people in more danger than they ever would have been before. Right. But also in the UK, there is this huge we don't make a living wage issue. There's been a lot of wage cuts to, you know, public servants, you know, firefighters, nurses, that kind of thing, paramedics, policemen, you know, people who provide life-saving public services. And there's also been people out in the streets because they're like, I literally can't afford to live anywhere. It's not, I can't afford to live in my home. I can't afford to live anywhere, because the cost of living is so insane. You know, tackling something like that really head on could have a huge impact, I think. And if you did like really prevalent issues like that, and again, something with more of a universal quality. I'm obviously thinking about this as American, but you know, there are British politics that need to be discussed. And obviously, if you can do something Mad Max like that's talking about politics all over the world, you know, they sort of have a representation of like Australia and the UK and America and sort of like overlapping political issues. One thing I think that would be the best, but yeah, one thing that I think would be interesting that the show could get into that is an issue in the United States, and we've talked about it to a certain extent, but is a much bigger issue in Europe, and that is the immigration crisis. Oh, that absolutely needs to be addressed. But the issue with that is that as soon as you talk about it, America's going to go fucking insane, because that's exactly what Americans did with Brexit and the immigration crisis there, even though whatever your opinions are of Brexit and the immigration crisis that's happening all over Europe, you have to understand the immigration situation in Europe and the United Nations
is so insanely different than the immigration situation happening in America. It's so dramatically different, but we hear buzzwords like immigration, and we immediately apply our viewpoint to our political issue at home, to our viewpoint of this political issue somewhere else that's dramatically different. And to start with, to not take sides as like one side is right and one side is wrong, but let's just look at the basic fact of the immigration crisis comes down to there are too many immigrants being accepted by too small of countries. The UN decided every country was going to take an equal number of immigrants / refugees, because not everybody who came in was a refugee. But the problem is that different
migrants as well.
Right. The problem is that not every country has the same population or has the same amount of resources or has the same ability to take in those refugees. And that's where the crisis comes in. It's just the ridiculous amount of influx was too much for most countries in the UK to bear. Even if it was a situation of everybody in Europe was perfectly civil and had no political issues or no religious issues, and all of the immigrants and refugees who came in were perfect and had no political issues or no religious issues, there still would have been problems just because resources are going to be different. And that's something that America refuses to budge on, but that's also something that every country has to look at realistically. Realistically in America, we have enough empty homes because the price of housing is so insanely expensive that every homeless person could have 6 houses if we distributed housing in an equal way.
Right, but then we'll make the argument that like, oh, they don't meet a certain standard, so that's why we can't do it. Right. There are always excuses that politicians and people that are essentially bribed to say whatever companies and yeah. Well,
there are other problems. I mean, like I said, the reason why there is, housing isn't distributed equally, and housing is so insanely expensive that a lot of people can't realistically afford it, even if you're not homeless, obviously. But then we also have an infrastructure that's completely falling apart because we're spending so much money on, military bases and occupation and wars all over the world that we don't need to be involved in. Most of Americans don't want to be involved in, but we're spending, this is conservative and leaving out a lot of numbers, but we're spending $125 million a day on the war on terror to get 6,500% increase in terror and not do a damn thing about it, instead of, taking care of people at home. When we're in that situation, we can't also take care of people who aren't at home. I understand that argument. Obviously, I don't really agree with that, because I'm like, well, yeah, we need to not be spending our money on that and be spending our money here, because then we would have the resources to help people abroad who are coming here, who need refugee shelter, who are immigrating, who do want to make a better life for themselves. Clearly. But, people are more likely to see the other side of the argument than not.
Right.
In the media, we have this, like, monkey poo-flinging style of, you're Republican bad, you're Democrat bad. But people having one-on-one conversations in general, not always. You definitely see video footage of this where it's like, no, there are definitely real people who think this way, but there are plenty of people who can sit down and look at an issue that they are on opposite sides of and say, well, we have different takes on this issue, but we can see that there is a problem that needs to be resolved, and we can come up with a way to resolve it that makes us both happy, and we think is the morally correct and legally correct way to do it. It's not that hard. It would be really interesting to see V for Vendetta not be used as a symbol of one side or the other side, but to be a symbol of truly a populist movement, the many versus the few, with a diversity of viewpoints and opinions and political standpoints. That would be really interesting. And that's what I'm sort of the most looking forward to seeing in the TV show in like a more modern context.
No, I totally agree. There's so much that could be expressed, given a longer format, given the fact that it's going to be on Channel 4, gives it a lot of leeway to have
and hopefully a good budget. looking at Black Mirror, I'm hoping a decent budget.
Yeah, well, this is the same studio that is working on Electric Dreams, which I haven't seen yet because
but you download it. Oh my god! I'm sorry, I have to fangirl for a minute because oh my god, Janelle Monáe, you guys!
Yeah.
Oh my god, she's gonna be Cindy Mayweather, and it's gonna be amazing. Oh my god!
So it is. So it is. It has already been released in the UK, but currently its Amazon release has not been
come out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know it already came out in the UK. I'm jelly.
But that being said, it definitely seems like an interesting and important source to adapt at this time, especially given the context that it had and seeing where it could expand to.
Well, I'm also really curious to see how well it does because I hear rumors about actors being so ridiculously underpaid that they have to leave. Like, actually, Downton Abbey, of course, obviously, is a really brilliant period piece that's talking about a lot of political issues in sort of an irreverent way and puts a lot of money into its budget. But the reason why, if you notice, like, sometimes they're like, whoa, you just killed off a character? Okay. Oh, wow, you just lost someone else. It's because they can't keep actors because they can't pay them. I hear that they put so much money into the show that they can't keep the people to actually run the show, and that's really hard to hear, honestly, as somebody who, you know, can sympathize with working people. Like, you have to have people who can actually run it, and you have to pay them enough to do it. You just have to.
Well, yeah, I mean,
so hopefully that doesn't happen to the show. But
yeah, there's several BBC shows which. Part of me liked this in certain TV shows that, you know, because of them paying the actors in certain ways, the stakes were higher because, like, characters would just get killed off here and there because, like, the actors would leave in it. Well,
at least it makes the show more interesting, even though people can't survive and stay on the show at the same time.
Well, I was saying, I know that sounds really fucked up when you think about it, but like,
I know that's not what you meant, but it's just funny.
Yeah, but it was one of those things where I did think that it raised the stakes in a certain way. But I did want to bring up something that Alan Moore said to the LA Times doing an interview about, you know, adaptations of his work and everything like that. And
he's not going to like it no matter what happens because he's kind of a little bitch about it. I'm sorry, yeah. Alan Moore is an asshole, and there are certain people who are geniuses and you adore them, but they're assholes and you have to admit it. Well, yeah, Alan Moore is definitely one of those people.
He's also a guy that, like, thinks that he's like his own deity and like all this kind of stuff. Like he
is a genius. I mean, like,
he has like this cult of women and all that kind of stuff. Like he gets like really kooky. But
I'm saying he's full of himself, but it's kind of warranted.
Yeah. So he says, I find a film in its modern form to be quite bullying. It spoon feeds us, which has the effect of watering down our collective cultural imagination. It is as if we are freshly hatched birds looking up with our mouths open, waiting for Hollywood to feed us more regurgitated worms. The Watchmen film sounds more like regurgitated worms.
He turned out to be right, but
yeah, I for
he didn't know that yet.
I, for one, am sick of worms. Can we get something else? Perhaps takeout. Even Chinese worms would be a nice change. I don't know. Like that
I've heard that quote before, but it's still so funny.
Yeah. I think it's really... And he did not like the V for Vendetta adaptation.
No, I mean, if I was Alan Moore and I had written the comic book, I wouldn't like the movie either.
Well, one of the I think the first adaptation of his work was a piece of shit, From Hell.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was just a crappy movie. It was boring as hell. And like, you read the graphic novel and you're like, wow, this is like really interesting.
Kind of like watching Mask and then reading Mask, and you're like, whoa.
The Mask, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, there is a movie called Mask, and like two.
But that's a totally different movie. That's not what I meant.
But yeah, and then The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was another work that he did, which was butchered to no end.
Oh yeah.
I would like to see at least one faithful adaptation of an Alan Moore work at some point. You know, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen would be awesome to make a TV series. However, the stain of that movie
probably it's never going to happen again. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least there are people who like Watchmen and like V for Vendetta, the movies. You know, there's definitely controversy around both, but there are at least people who like it. Who in the world likes League of Extraordinary Gentlemen?
Also, it would be
I haven't heard a single kind word about that movie.
Also, it would be interesting if you made like an animated show that was an adaptation of his version of the Swamp Thing, which I've heard many tremendous things about.
Actually, I disagree with you because American studios won't put in the money for the animation to be as good as it needs to be.
Oh God! Like
they won't do it.
That's been a recent problem that we've had,
and it's so stupid.
Yeah, like
oh God, it makes me angry.
I think the last good animated, like as far as like animation quality that I saw was like Assault on Arkham. Like the animation in that is gorgeous.
Great.
You know, like a lot of
animated DC movies where like the animation is really good. I think the Wonder Woman movie looks very well animated as well.
The new Constantine animated thing that's coming out looks amazing though.
Well, it's so ridiculous because you know what Warner Brothers says? Nobody does 2D art anymore.
There
are hundreds of American animators who would beg to differ. Starting with Don Bluth, by the way. I mean, my God.
Also, it's like, you know, rejecting the fact that like Hayao Miyazaki isn't tremendously influential in the United States alone.
Oh, well, I mean, well, okay, first of all, you're looking away from America at that point, and if you look at Japanese animation, just like American television, that is such a mixed bag. You could, you know, you reach into the bag and you pull out Attack on Titan and it's amazing, and you reach into the bag and you pull out Boku no Pico and you're just like, oh God, what did I bring myself into?
Why did you bring up Boku no Pico?
Or like, okay, fine. You reach into the bag and you pull out Holic: A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is clearly a ripoff of Spirited Away, by the way, with far inferior animation. My point is, you know, in Japan, at least, it's sort of a mixed bag of it could go either way. In America, they're not willing to try anymore at this particular moment in time with comic book animated adaptations. I'm not saying there aren't animation artists still in America, like I just said. Of course there are. It's just Warner Brother has its... Warner Brother needs to stop smelling its own farts and start looking at the talent that they have available to them if they're willing to just pull out their wallet and invest in artists and their actual vision and not just, oh, well, it'll look cool in a trailer. We'll give it to a trailer company. Jesus Christ. Deadpool did well. We'll make it R-rated. Shut the fuck up.
Well, granted, I still have yet to watch it. Well, it hasn't come out yet, but I'm going to show you the Constantine thing because it looks pretty cool.
Who produced that?
Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers did. When
animation.
That's coming out soon?
It's coming out.
Then why the fuck won't they do 2D animation for Bone?
I don't know, because Kevin Tsujihara, who given some recent revelations,
might not be around much longer. We'll see.
Yeah, and one can hope because like, good God, this DC CU like needs to die.
But the comment that I just made that Warner Brothers said came from Jeff Smith. He specifically said, "Oh, well, I wanted 2D animation for Bone."
Mm-hmm.
Which, if there's anyone you should listen to about it, it's Jeff Smith. Can you just listen to him? For God's sake. So he wanted 2D animation, and he said that he was told by Warner Brothers that nobody's doing 2D animation anymore. And it's not possible. So how the fuck are they coming out with Constantine, but they won't do it for Bone?
Because that's directly to home video as opposed to something that would be a theatrical experience.
Which one?
The Constantine.
Is home video?
Yeah.
Meaning Netflix? Meaning streaming? Meaning Amazon? What does that mean?
No, it's kind of like the release of Batman and Harley. Like that, you know, where like it might get like a couple days in the theater.
You mean a single day?
Yeah.
Batman and Harley got a single day. Killing Joke got a single day, and then it was available for streaming. I think they were both on Amazon.
It's probably going to be released the same way.
But Killing Joke looked like garbage. Batman and Harley was better, but it wasn't Attack on Arkham. It wasn't Wonder Woman. It wasn't Flashpoint Paradox.
I'm telling you, the Constantine stuff looks better.
I'm not doubting you.
The Constantine stuff looks more to the level.
I'm not doubting you, but I'm saying when you have a franchise like Batman, why does that look like garbage? And then, not to piss on Constantine, but by comparison, no-name franchise is coming out with decent animation.
I mean, to be fair, Constantine did have a show that, while it wasn't able to stay on the air, did have
I'm saying
popularity.
By comparison. I'm not saying
right.
It is a no-name franchise. I know what Constantine is. I'm just saying it's not Batman. Fucking Batman. And even like Batman and Harley aside, The Killing Joke is one of the most lauded graphic novels of all time. How did you not put in the time and effort to make that look decent?
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because like the animation.
We've really gone off track. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, it's a live stream. That's kind of what happens sometimes. You know,
V for Vendetta is not going to be animated, so it's not really the point.
Right.
And it's also not going to be Warner Brothers. Thank God. I mean, it'll be nice to see a DC property that isn't DCU or isn't Warner Brothers handled. I'm really excited for that, quite honestly.
I'm trying to think of like another example. I guess.
And by the way, yes, it is DC. Yeah, I'm literally pointing to the DC stamp on my trade that I have sitting right in front of me because I'm a nerd.
Well,
to be fair, I think now it's owned by Vertigo, so that might be why they're doing it in Britain. Maybe that's what it is.
Constantine is also technically it was released as Hellblazer. But, you know, everybody knows it as Constantine,
right.
And that's mostly because of the Keanu Reeves movie. And I think the TV show was called Constantine as well. But that being said, it's certainly something that would be interesting to see.
So now, at long last, let's circle back around now that I've said my piece of what I want the TV show to be like. What are you looking for in the TV show?
I'm looking for a TV show that, you know, is actually a TV show that does branch out a little bit more. Granted, BBC shows are a lot shorter, which definitely means that it would probably be more like a miniseries, you know, like you're saying, but it would like be spaced out, you know, with seasons and everything like that. So, you know, like in total, like 15 episodes at the most.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just because like what BBC seasons are like what 6, 7 episodes at the most.
Yeah, something like that. I think that there have been seasons of Downton Abbey that are like 3 or 5 episodes. Don't take my word on that, but I swear to God, they had like a season that was 3 episodes.
Oh yeah,
probably not true. I'm
what is it?
Exaggerating, but
Luther literally had a season that had
2 episodes. That's what it was. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, so you know that does happen. I like we've talked about in our podcast. I do think that one thing that I would like to see is it be a modern, futurist adaptation. You know, taking a lot of culturally significant events of our time and reincorporating it into, you know, our idea of what a terrifying future could be, and not just emulating what the book presents. I would like the show to get into some of the more kooky aspects of V's character, just because I think emphasizing his insanity does have a certain point to it. I also really would like the show to get into the hypocrisy of idealism, you know, especially with all the stuff at the end, you know, of like, you know, infighting with groups and all that kind of stuff. I think that certainly could be expanded upon, you know, like that you could give that more than just, you know, an episode or like sort of a footnote at the end. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's something significant to the book, but like it would be interesting to like see characters that are actually involved in this and not just, oh, look at this crazy crowd.
Right.
So that's one thing that I would like to see from the show. I would like the show to incorporate some of the visual panache that the movie had, maybe a little less dark. And I don't just mean in it. I don't really mean in its tone. I just mean like in
Visually,
its look.
not so much black on black.
Yeah, I mean, the movie was very high contrast. It was a lot of black and white, like quite literally on the screen, and
or maybe like black and warm white color, like a tungsten sort of look.
Yeah,
black and tungsten,
and the reddest red you ever saw.
Of course.
But it would be nice to see a little bit more color thrown into the show. I certainly would like to see Evie being a prostitute brought back. I think that there's a lot.
I agree with that. I don't disagree with that. But if you had her be young and desperate and you gave her a different angle, I'd be okay with it. It doesn't have to be sex slave to make it work. You could, and I wouldn't complain, but if it is a thing of in our post season 5 Game of Thrones era, that's just impossible. As long as it is still the young and desperate.
I forget what the actual I heard about it in a video that a YouTuber that I like, Jordan Rockwell Smith, I think is his name or something, where he talked about the lower classes of the UK, where probably the best example for people that are not familiar with it is like the very beginning of the first Kingsman movie. You know, people from like that lifestyle, or if you've watched the BBC show Misfits.
Or if you've seen Attack the Block.
Yeah, you know, kind of like that. I could see her coming from something like that, and that would definitely add a more modern flair to it. I mean, it would be interesting if she were a woman of color. I
don't think that would change the character too much. Like, no, I think it would fit right in with her character. It wouldn't be a thing of like, what? But no, she has no.
No, it would definitely add a different flair to it, but I don't think that it would be unfaithful to the character.
That's what I mean to say, exactly. But if it was kind of a thing like Attack the Block, where maybe she was like in a gang instead of being a prostitute,
yeah,
that would work.
I think also what could be interesting is like really emphasizing, you know, this cultural melting pot, which Britain is now experiencing and kind of rejecting, and getting a little bit more into this idea of how with V for Vendetta, a lot of it is about the people versus the government. And I would like to see something more about the infighting with people, because that seems to be the real issue right now. You know, government is involved with that, and that's very much prevalent, but I would like to see more characters in the story as well, to sort of expand it out, so it's not just, you know, this story essentially about 2 characters with a couple more characters, you know, as supporting. I would like to see a show where they like really expand on the story, like where you know, the investigator has, you know, a family, and, you know, has to, you know, deal with like stuff with his brother, and like, you know, you could expand out on that, and you could
do something else. We were just watching the show where, oh my god, I can't remember what the show. Oh, we were watching The Sinner. Mild spoilers for The Sinner, by the way. But you know how there was the investigator, and we were like, why does he have to like be divorcing his wife? His relationship with his girlfriend is so interesting by itself. If they did something like that and like didn't have a family, I think that would be really interesting. I think that would be a lot more interesting and more modern.
Yeah, I also would really be interested to see the TV show get into hacktivism, which wasn't really a big thing at that time that the movie came out.
It's something that's like begging to be addressed post the V for Vendetta movie.
Well, yeah, since like
because the movie,
the majority of hackers
popular.
now,
Yeah,
you know, have the anonymous mask, and like, you know, Mr. Robot is somewhat of an adaptation of that to a certain extent,
and they have
mixed
their
in
own,
with Fight Club and all
they have
this.
their own version of the V for Vendetta mask that's still very clearly the V for Vendetta mask.
Yeah,
you know, but it's their own design. But you look at it and you're like, oh, that's Guy Fawkes. But instead of Guy Fawkes, it's the Monopoly Man. You know, whatever. Going back to what you were saying about the political infighting, that's also what I was trying to say with like addressing political diversity. Is what really I think needs to be addressed in a more modern context is the idea of we need to rise above petty infighting over superficial differences to create a many versus the few situation. Because right now, all over the world, we're not even a many versus the few. We're a, you know, the powerful few versus the few from here and the few from here and the few from here and the few from here.
Yeah.
And I think that an important part of the story needs to be the coming together and becoming the many. And sort of, if possible, kind of a roadmap to how to do that in a morally and legally upstanding way.
I will disagree with you on that, because like that's one of the things that I think is the problem of the movie, you know, idealizing that. I would like to see the downfall. I'm not talking about the everybody donning their mask at the end of the movie. I'm talking about the Benny Hill scene. Okay, gotcha. I'm talking about more scenes like that as an example of what to aspire to versus this sort of bland, romanticized, sugar-coated, well, everybody just gets together. I'm talking about more applicable advice to what you can actually do as a powerless citizen who wants to change society at a systemic level. That's what I'm talking about. Gotcha. If it's even possible. If it's possible. It may not be possible. Not everybody has the answers. But that's what I would like to see the most. So what would you like to see in a V for Vendetta adaptation for Channel 4 on the BBC? I was just flipping through this to kind of see if I could find an answer on this. If they do sort of do what I was saying of like every chapter is an episode, there are 3 volumes. Obviously, if you look at the trade, there's 10 trades, but even in the trades, there's like volumes. So it's 3 volumes, and the 3rd volume was 5 episodes, so it might be 3 seasons of 5 episodes or something around that area. So it could be like a 15-episode full series. Yeah, that works. Theoretically. But also, like you were saying, like with having spin-off characters, what I do like about the book and what I would like them to explore more than the book did and more than the movie did is I like that they had characters at different levels of the system, so to speak. You had people, you know, actively involved in the government, people actively fighting against the government. You had people in poverty. You had people in wealth. You had people, you know, in different struggling positions. Sort of what I like about Mobile Suit Gundam 00 was it sort of was looking at war from that perspective of like, from the perspective of the civilians, to the perspective of the foot soldiers, to the perspective of the generals, to the perspective of like the highest ups who are actually giving like the overall commands, you know. Seeing something where it is more exploring all those levels for sure, but it definitely needs to be more fleshed out than either the graphic novel or the movie did. Yeah, and like we've seen with adaptations like The Handmaid's Tale, there are... You can do it. I mean, not to piss on the book, because the book is pretty good, but the TV show is better than the book in every way. Every element is better in the miniseries. Well, I mean, there's going to be another season, but you know. Just out of curiosity, here is a wild idea. What if you did it Fargo style? Oh, okay. I'm not sure I'm entirely okay with like, let's just abandon the story and abandon the characters and only have the location, because I think in both the book and the movie, the location is not that memorable. Well, what if it's sort of an expansion and a sequel to it? I mean, there's a problem with calling your series V for Vendetta and not having
V for Vendetta in your series. You know, in the Fargo TV show, you're still in Fargo.
Or what if it was a show that worked as a prequel modern day and, you know, kind of played with time, you know, like how in some episodes, like you would see him being tortured and then it would play into, you know, what's happening now. And you could kind of like use that as a narrative device to show how he gets to certain points. I think having a TV show that
kind
would
of
be
loses its irreverence, though.
Well, I'm saying as a TV show.
As soon as you say, you know, certain people's names or certain people, like as soon as you say the word Brexit, it's pigeonholed into a certain time and place. And I think it needs to be something bigger than that.
Well, it would still take place in the future.
No, I know, but even if you have flashbacks to a time where they're like, Brexit is happening.
Well, we have American Horror Story for that now.
Exactly.
All right, so what did you think of our discussion? Where would you like to see V for Vendetta go in a TV show? Would you like to see a V for Vendetta TV show? Let us know in the comments below. And if there's a certain topic that you would like to see us discuss, let us know too. I know that we have been building a conversation to talk about the Harvey Weinstein stuff, but that's a lot to tackle. And we probably need somebody else on the podcast to talk about that. So
if you think that's you, let us know.
Thanks for listening.